Every so often, a crime will happen that captures the attention of the nation, and along with that, the national media. Now, the media can be something of a double-edged sword, especially in the case of an ongoing investigation. This seems to be more the case in the UK than anywhere else in the world. And in my opinion, this is because the British media, especially the tabloid print media, are vultures and are, by and large, sensationalist arseholes that are more interested in vilifying anyone that will sell them more papers than sticking to the facts and waiting for evidence-based outcomes. Today's case sees one of the worst examples of the tabloid media spitting in the face of innocent until proven guilty, and in that respect is one of the most notorious British cases in recent years. This is the turmoil and media bloodthirstiness surrounding the horrifying murder of Joanna Yeates, and this is Murder of Crows.
Say that you're ready, but you won't like it. You say that you're ready, but you won't like it. Silence all the crows, lining up in little rows. A sudden chill surrounds me. Silence all the crows, see come out and say you're wrong. A sudden chill.
Today's case takes us to Bristol in 2010. Now, I lived in Bristol in the late 1990s, so it is a city that is very dear to me. So when this case hit the headlines, it hit closer to home than perhaps some other cases. But before we jump into the minutiae of what happened and how things unfolded, we first need to look at a loving, ordinary couple who had just moved to a new flat. Greg Reardon was 27. And his girlfriend Joanna Yeates was 25. They had been together for 2 years, and they worked for the same company, BDP Design Consultancy in Bristol. They'd been living together for over a year of that time, and in October of 2010, they were moving to a flat at 44 Carnegie Road in Clifton, a suburb of the city. The flat was owned by Christopher Jeffries, who lived in one of the upper flats within the building. Now, Mr. Jeffries will become very important in this story as it unfolds. They finally move in on October the 25th, and the couple were excited and happy to start this next chapter in their lives. And so, approaching Christmas of that year, and get-togethers are the festive norm. Work parties, family reunions, and general shenanigans become more widespread than perhaps at other times of the year. And this was the case for Greg Reardon, as on Friday, December the 17th, he was due to travel to Sheffield to visit family. Knowing he would be away for the weekend, Greg made time to have lunch with his girlfriend Joanna at the Hope and Anchor pub that was near to their office. At the end of the workday, Greg kissed Joanna goodbye as he planned to travel to Sheffield that evening, while Joanna stayed at the office as she was planning to go for drinks with some of their colleagues. As Greg was wending his way north, Joanna and her workmates went to the Ram pub for a night, just unwinding and relaxing, arriving at the pub at around 6 p.m. And then by around 8 p.m, she was ready to leave. So Joanna started heading for home and picked up night in for one supplies, including a couple of bottles of cider from Bargain Booze and a quick and easy meal from Tesco, basil and mozzarella stone-baked pizza, if you're interested in that level of detail. She then walked back to the flat, just stopping briefly to chat to a priest who happened to be walking his dog near to Joanna's flat. All very run-of-the-mill. But then she vanishes. At about 10:30 p.m, Greg tried ringing Joanna but got no answer. Now he thought nothing of it, as he knew that she was going out that night. So instead, he just sent her a text saying, "Made it okay, good traffic, car wouldn't start, so had to get neighbour to start it. Okay now. Did you have a good time in the pub?" He did not get a reply to the text. But he was not concerned until he returned to the flat they shared on Sunday the 19th of December. He was immediately worried, as the cat appeared distressed and seemed not to have been fed, which obviously Joanna would never have allowed to happen. He also found Joanna's phone in her jacket pocket when he tried to call it and heard it ringing. When he saw that Joanna's glasses, purse, and keys were also in the flat, his concern was such that he called the police at around midnight, and also called Joanna's parents to let them know that Joanna was nowhere to be found. Now, when investigators arrived at the flat, they found a receipt for the pizza that Joanna had bought. But there was no sign of the pizza itself or of its packaging. They did recover the 2 bottles of cider, one unopened and one partly drunk. Importantly, there was no sign of any disturbance or of any forced entry at the flat. In line with checking out the significant other, investigators took and analysed Greg Reardon's phone and laptop, but nothing incriminating or suspicious was found. So with no progress over the next day or so, the police took the decision to have Joanna's parents make a media plea on the 21st of December, appealing for information and expressing their love for Joanna and pleading with her to get in touch. Greg Reardon and Joanna's brother Chris were also present for the appeal. Now, when still no progress and no sightings were made by the 23rd of December, people began to fear the worst and consider an abduction or maybe something even worse. After Joanna had been missing for 8 days, a horrifying discovery was made on Christmas Day of 2010 by dog walkers who found a body in snow on Longwood Lane in Fayland, which was about 4 miles from the suburb of Clifton, where Joanna had lived in the flat with Greg. It's always dog walkers, isn't it? Anyway, the body was confirmed as being Joanna on the 26th of December, but the post-mortem was delayed due to Joanna's body being completely frozen. When it went ahead on the 28th of December, the cause of death was established as manual strangulation. She had been found fully clothed, suggesting no sexual assault, though she was not wearing a jacket and was strangely missing one sock. The police spoke to Vincent Tabak, a 32-year-old Dutch engineer who lived next door to Joanna with his girlfriend Tanya Mawson. Now, Vincent wanted to help, but stated that he'd neither seen nor heard anything the night of the possible disappearance. Other witnesses in the area reported hearing screams at around 8:50 p.m. on the night of Friday the 17th of December. But nothing else of significance apparently was seen or heard. Joanna's landlord, Christopher Jeffries, who lived upstairs in the building, reported seeing 3 people outside the flat, but could not be more specific as it was dark and he'd only seen this at a distance. Between Christmas and New Year, police had already searched Joanna and Greg's flat along with Vincent Tabak's flat, finding nothing useful at all. Vincent, who was a Dutch national, travelled with his girlfriend to Holland via the Eurotunnel to visit family for the new year, but was driven to keep in touch with the police to try to help over the festive period. In one phone call from Holland, Vincent suggests he may have information regarding the landlord, Christopher Jeffries. So Jeffries is arrested that day, which is the 30th of December 2010. Eager to follow this up, police travelled to Holland to speak directly with Vincent Tabak, and he goes through his own movements along with his concerns about Christopher Jeffries. And he also willingly provides fingerprints and DNA to investigators who are now closing in around Christopher Jeffries, who had been described by people who knew him as eccentric, weird, and in some cases creepy. Jeffries was very involved in his community through supporting the Liberal Democrat Party at events and being heavily involved in the neighbourhood watch in the Clifton area. Now, by this time he was 65, and he was retired from a role as an English teacher at a private school called Clifton College. His former students described him as unconventional but inspirational. So in Holland, police are firming up Vincent Tabak's story, while at home in the UK, all hell is breaking loose as the media vent their anger at Jeffries. They are cruel, relentless, and go at Jeffries with all guns blazing. In terms of facts, there was nothing linking Jeffries to Joanna's death, and since there is no law against being quirky, Jeffries is released on bail on the 1st of January 2011, pending further inquiries. though there is no let-up in the media assault on Jeffries, who are continuing to break down his character and are doing everything to get Jeffries to speak on the record. Outside of the rabid tabloid manhunt, the police are keen to keep the rest of the media on side, and they were working alongside the BBC Crime Watch programme to plan further appeals, and were doing everything to try to keep the case in the news in an attempt to draw in more information. More than 2 weeks later, with Christopher Jeffries being tabloid enemy number one throughout that entire time, the police arrest Vincent Tabak on the 20th of January 2011 at a flat in Aberdeen Road, Cottam, which is an area of Bristol, where he had been staying, and he was arrested on suspicion of murdering Joanna after DNA linked him to Joanna's body. On working back and piecing things together, this is the best picture of what actually happened on the night of the 17th of December 2010. Shortly after returning home to her flat, sometime between 8:45 and 9:25 p.m, Joanna Yeates was strangled by Vincent Tabak, who then bundled her body into the boot of his Renault Megane. He then sent a text to his girlfriend, Tanya Mawson, who was on a night out at her work Christmas party, saying, "Miss you, lords. It's boring here without you. VXX." Boring. If that's your idea of boring, then blimey. He then went for a pootle in the car, with Joanna's body in the boot, obviously. And he went to Asda and bought crisps, rock salt and beer. As you do. He then texted his girlfriend again saying, "I'm at Asda, was bored." Tabak then picks up Tanya Mawson at around 1:35 a.m. and they are seen on CCTV getting a takeaway. I don't know what they had. Nothing is known about how and when Joanna's body was dumped, but it's likely that the gap between Asda and Tabak picking up his girlfriend at 1:35 a.m. is significant. On the 22nd of January, Avon and Somerset police confirm that Tabak had been charged with the murder of Joanna Yeates. And then on February the 8th, 2011, he admitted to a prison chaplain that he had killed her. On May the 5th, 2011, Tabak pled guilty to manslaughter but denied murder. His plea of manslaughter was rejected, and it was determined that he would be tried for murder in October of 2011. throughout the investigation and on into the trial, Tabak maintained that he did not know how Joanna had sustained all 43 injuries that were found at the post-mortem. It was claimed that Tabak applied sufficient force in order to strangle her. He could have stopped, but he didn't. Tabak's defense was that the killing was not sexually motivated and that he had no intention of killing her. He stated that she had made a flirty comment to him and invited him over for a drink at her flat. Once inside, he tried to kiss her and she screamed. To stop her screaming, he put his hand over her mouth. When he removed his hand, she continued to scream. So he put his hand back over her mouth and his other hand around her throat and held it there, as you do, unintentionally causing her death. He then bundled her body into the boot of his car and drove to Asda, before he then drove to Longwood Lane and dumped her body, which was eventually discovered on Christmas Day by dog walkers. Why is it always dog walkers? The jury deliberated for 3 days. And Vincent Tabak was found guilty of Joanna Yeates' murder by a 10-2 majority. Tabak was sentenced to life in prison with a minimum term of 20 years. During the trial, the jury did not hear of the violent pornography Vincent Tabak watched on his computer in the lead-up to the murder. The details of this came out once the trial was already over. After the trial, it was also found that Tabak also possessed over 100 pornographic images of children. He was charged and sentenced to a further 10 months in prison. What a sweetie. Form an orderly queue, ladies. In the aftermath of the trial, a memorial garden was opened in honor of Joanna Yeates. At the time of her death, Joanna had been designing a new garden for Southmead Hospital. So this was developed into a garden in her honor. Speaking at the opening of the garden, Joanna's father, David Yeates, said, "I never realized that Jo had such an impact on other people, and that really gives me an enormous amount of pride." She died when she was 25, and it would have been interesting to see what she might have achieved if she had lived another 25 years. And in terms of Christopher Jeffries, who had been pilloried in the press after his arrest, Well, Jeffreys sued 8 UK newspapers for libel. His lawyer spoke out on the matter at the time, saying, "Christopher Jeffreys is the latest victim of the regular witch hunts and character assassinations conducted by the worst elements of the British tabloid media." Jeffreys received substantial damages from the newspapers, as well as a public apology from the police.
One moment, Christopher Jeffreys was a concerned landlord and neighbour. The next, he was a murder suspect, an innocent man, and a life changed forever.
Well, I think I was probably just numb at the time with the shock of it all. I was able to think of nothing except what was going to happen next.
What was that whole process like for you, though?
In the event, I suppose, something which started to make me feel really rather angry, that I knew that I was innocent. Nobody else knew that I was innocent, but nevertheless I was required to go through these very protracted series of interviews during the course of 3 days.
And as police concentrated on Christopher Jeffreys, Joanna Yeates' real killer, Vincent Tabak, remained a free man.
Whether they were making other inquiries at the same time or not, I don't know, but certainly a lot of their time and attention was taken up with me. Yes, and it did occur to me at the time that perhaps the focus should be elsewhere.
And looking back now, you're more certain about
absolutely clear that the focus should have been elsewhere, yes.
The lingering suspicion and the attention it attracted pushed Christopher Jeffreys into hiding. He was forced to stay with friends and to change his distinctive appearance.
But for quite a few days, I certainly stayed inside all day. I went out occasionally under cover of darkness, but it wasn't for quite a few weeks after I'd been released from custody. In fact, not really, until the police bail had been lifted in early March, that I felt I was able to start going about more or less as normal.
Did you resent that?
It was certainly the most difficult time of my life.
His arrest had prompted a media thirst, especially for intimate details about his life. He was variously vilified as strange, creepy, lewd, and obsessed by death.
Reading those, and reading them in such a concentrated and pointed form for the first time, was very, very upsetting indeed.
Did you recognise at all the person they were reporting?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not. This was an entirely foreign personality that was being foisted on me.
One tenant killing another has been just a small part of what Christopher Jeffreys has had to learn to live with.
It is something that one could never imagine in one's wildest and worst nightmares happening, quite.
But that nightmare, he says, is insignificant compared to the pain the Yeates family is feeling.
They've had to relive the whole of that as a result of the court proceedings, which must have been almost indescribably painful. I can't begin really to imagine what they have had to go through all over again in these last few weeks.
Does the letter that you've received now, as far as you're concerned, put an end to everything, or at least this part of your experience?
Oh yes. I mean, it does several things. It first of all provides the public exculpation, which is the equivalent of the apologies which the newspapers that I sued had to make when they appeared at the High Court in the summer of 2011. It acknowledges, and this is something that the police had not done before, it acknowledges the very considerable distress which all this caused, And it goes some way, I think, at least implicitly, towards acknowledging that it didn't just affect me, it affected members of my family, it affected friends. So they were also, to a degree, victims as well as I was.
An objective observer might listen to you speaking today and think, and be surprised perhaps by the fact that there appears to be no anger with you. You seem quite calm, quite pragmatic about what you've been through, which by anybody's standards is quite terrifying and horrible. But you don't appear angry.
Well, at the time, I was extremely angry after the shock of being arrested and what I initially had to experience had worn off. I was extremely angry both with the police and subsequently with the press when I discovered the sort of things that had been printed while I was in custody. I think almost 3 years would be quite a long time to sustain that anger. And in any case, it's worth stressing that some beneficial things have come out of it. After all, the sort of evidence that I was able to give to the Leveson inquiry is contributory towards the whole of that process. And I hope that as a result of it, we shall get to a point where the sort of thing that happened to me, the sort of thing that happened to other victims such as the McCanns and the Dowlers, is most unlikely to happen again.
So a horrific case made all the more twisted by the actions of the British tabloid press. But rather than focus on Jeffries, who I do have a great deal of sympathy for, or the vile creature that is Vincent Tabak, I would prefer to focus on the victim, Joanna Yeates. She was living with her partner and best friend, doing a job she loved, and had recently moved to a new flat. She really was living her best life, and it was cut down at the nauseatingly young age of 25, just because a man made a pass at her and was rejected. I truly hope she is at peace, and anyone affected by her murder have found ways through the grief and the loss. Thank you for watching another episode of Murder of Crows. I'm Steve. Samson is apparently plumb tuckered out and won't get off his arse. So in his absence, I will reiterate, I'm Steve, and I'll see you when I see you.